This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello, audience. Really glad you could join us for this really special episode of Collective Design. We're going to be indulging in some collective wisdom on this. Hey, Julie Barfus. I love the little shout outs from the audience. I'm doing Collective Design today from Houston. So I'm embedded in the Texas-Oklahoma chapter today. Really excited about today's conversation. So let me quickly introduce our speakers. All right, and we're going to start with Paul Bird, who is with the Han Company. Why don't you jump on, Paul? Hey, Paul. Eladette Guerrero. Hey, Eladette. Come on. Peter Harrison, who is with Gensler. Jump on. And last but not least, Vanessa Vu. All right, so are all the panelists on? Okay, friends from Texas are asking me how I'm liking this heat here. Got the double H's, heat and humidity. All right, so this conversation, as many of you know, IIDA recently celebrated its 30th anniversary. IIDA is a millennial organization, and we thought it would be great to have a panel of millennials, honestly, the emerging generation of designers, to talk a little bit about life and work, and maybe do some myth busting about demographics. And so we're going to jump right in, and because we are going to start with work, I want to ask a couple of our panelists to talk about their first job. Paul, you're going to be first up. Can you tell us a little bit about your first job? What was it? What did you learn? What did you learn about yourself and about the industry? What was revelatory about that first job for you?
Yeah, certainly, Cheryl. Thank you for having me today. My first job out of college was a solutions account associate with the Han Company, the company I'm currently with, which was essentially an inside sales support role. What I learned there was essentially the office furniture and design industry. But ultimately, what I learned through that was how to work with all of the different people within the office furniture and furniture industry. Designers, project managers, salespeople, all alike. Essentially, what I came out with from that program, which was a year-long program, was just how detail-oriented and problem-solving oriented this industry really is. And coming from a background of mathematics and business administration in my schooling, it was a little intimidating to come into an industry like this. To have some familiarity there was awesome. And then ultimately what I ended up finding out even more so was that I had an appreciation and a liking of fashion and design and aesthetic that I'd never really realized that I had previously. And that's kind of what's kept me coming back for more within this industry. So.
All right, so you're a math guy, you're a numbers guy.
I am, yes.
So you've been with Han for a bit. You've got some tenure and longevity, and I know we have some students who are listening in on this program. You know, often people are told jump around to different jobs, and I feel like we're at a moment in time where people are discouraging tenure. But would you mind talking a little bit about how longevity has supported you with Han?
Yeah, so honestly, ultimately with the mathematics background, I was looking for something that was a problem-solving oriented industry, and ultimately detail oriented. And I just had no idea. I know I didn't want to go into mathematics research or teaching, and I didn't know what else I wanted to do. I know that I had an interest with people, so sales was kind of a natural move for me. And then ultimately moving into sales and then finding this niche of fashion design aesthetic that I liked so much, it ultimately worked for me. And I haven't been willing to jump because it's kind of kept me so involved and interested, and my learning is frequent within this industry. So it really hasn't necessarily made me feel the need to jump.
Good. That's great. Thank you for that. Hey, Vanessa, what about you? What was your first job? What did you learn about yourself or the industry? Are there any takeaways that you can share with the audience?
Well, I think that would be a two-part of the answer.
Okay.
So my first part-time job was an intern at a design lab where I worked for my professors in school. And
Okay.
this is about 10 years ago, where I started learning the cool technology of time, like laser cutting, CNC, 3D printing. And this hands-on experience really introduced me to digital software like Rhino, SketchUp for complexity of 3D modelings and rendering technique, but also thrown me on real life deadline, project deadline circumstance. Then I think this my part-time jobs really landed my first full-time job at DOR. And
Okay.
this is the company I'm still working currently in my company nowadays, today. So, but I do have a long journey of back and forth. After my first year, focused solely on hotel and restaurant design. I
Okay.
paused design career for a year to learn how to operate restaurant with other restaurateurs to understand the back end of food and beverage industry.
So
Um,
you're a co-owner of a restaurant
correct. I am.
and a designer.
It is really a full-time job as interior designer. And I do learn in that part-time how to be co-owner of a small restaurant here in Chicago. And learning with that, learning how industry change and to adapt with new marketing method, social media, content on trending, all of that, all experience turn around food, beverage industry and design and marketing all combined together.
That's amazing. Do you ever sleep?
I do, but if my son, I have a 5 years old at home, and it does add to
Wow.
my experience. I do have being known as night owl.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a great thing. What have you learned about yourself? So you're juggling a lot of things. What have you learned about yourself, about your own skill set, your own talent, your own ability?
After all that long journey, I would say it is a long journey going back and forth and all design related. One major realization that I have is for the professional itself. So for an architect, they know something about everything. As an engineer, you knows everything about one thing. But as interior designer, we need to know how everything affects everyone. This is really our job end of day. In another word, I feel architects more generalists and engineer they're specialists. But as an interior designer, you're not just generalist. You need to collaborate with architects, engineer, consultants to make sure that you meet end of day, you need to meet clients' need,
Yeah.
functionality, and make sure they're profitable too.
Yeah.
Return ROI. So we are really in this industry to how to understand people interact and how they're impacted by space. So
Yeah.
we bridge the gap between design and daily life and make sure by the day of design, our detail in design have to enhance the user experience. This is what people are talking about nowadays, right? UX, UI design, it's all about user experience.
Yeah. I love that. I love how you express that, bridging the gap between design and daily life. I love that. Hey, Paul, let me toss one more question back at you, and I'm kind of referencing the entire group. Everybody here on the on Collective Design, you are all millennials, and you're not too far off in age from the oldest members of Gen Z. How do you think that your generation and Gen Zers engage with the built environment? And what ways do you think that your generation might be different than how other generations interact with space and place or the craft of placemaking?
Yeah. Cheryl, I think my generation and the generation after us, while we are different, I think something we have in similar is we want it all and we want it now. And what I mean by that is that ultimately with space and place, I think previous generations would come into the workplace and sit at their work spot or workspace and stay there for the majority of the day. If they needed to collaborate, they were going into a conference room. Ultimately, I think what we want is you to give us as many spaces as possible, but also make those spaces very flexible in what we can do within those spaces, which ultimately makes things a little bit more complex. And I think we just have higher expectations on how our employer sets us up for success. So we are not going to consider anything that is less than the best because we have come up being set up for success by our parents, by the previous generations, and we expect help. We expect support, and I think we are looking for what the workspace is doing and the kind of things that are happening within the workspace to reflect that.
Yeah. Eladette or Peter, do you want to jump in on that about the expectations that your generations have about that your generation has about the workplace? Oh, what I saw. Can I grab one of you? It's an on-the-spot question. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I think just to maybe quickly kind of build on what Paul's saying, I think there's also sort of the space and place, but there's sort of the human aspect. And I think so much of these concepts center around leadership and leadership paradigm shifting, which hopefully we'll sort of kind of continue to unpack in this episode. But I think there is just this desire for like leadership to be better and to be more sort of honest and authentic in the way that we're sort of coming to work, and not sort of putting this binary of like, I have my work life, I have my personal life, and they never sort of intersect. I think we're sort of disrupting that idea.
So a lack of compartmentalization, that those things more blur into one another.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would totally say that.
Yeah. Let me jump into, and this is open for all of you. What has surprised you about life and work in design? Anything you didn't expect? Any surprises about being in this industry, in the profession of design?
I can go ahead first.
Go ahead, Vanessa. Yeah.
Yeah. What I feel most surprised me about working in the design industry in general is probably a good designer isn't afraid to throw away a good idea. This realization is really came from working with a bigger teams, trying collaborating with everyone from different sectors, junior designer, leaderships. I think it's go two way. It's first thing, it's about the team relationship, and the second thing, it's really about aesthetic of the project in general, with function as well. So the core mindset here for this not afraid to throw away a good idea is a strong team relationship, like a conductor to an orchestra. When sometimes we need to let go of ego and embrace everyone's idea, that the final design just become more powerful as a whole.
Yeah.
So when there are multiple great ideas in the room, I'll have to learn how to let go and focus on absorbing and consider all that perspective to create something truly exceptional, one product. By the end of the day, we're one team, design one product. So really the designer goal is to integrate that whole building idea, not to incorporate all best feature in one room.
Yeah.
So let's say, example, if I have all my best sweater, all my best jacket, all my best pants, but I can't wear it all in one day. But just think about how to coordinate it. Think about the weather. Think about maybe just one feature to be the main cool things. Then the rest just become a harmonious, balanced idea. And that is come to the aesthetic of the building too, right? We don't want all best feature in one place and compete all great idea together. So I would say, okay, maybe my good idea just second best idea. Who have the best idea? Let's consider.
Nicely said, Vanessa. I appreciate that. Great analogies too. Paul, Eladette, or Peter, what anything surprising or revelatory? Eladette.
Yes. So I guess interior design just overall is really fascinating and very complex and essentially practical science, right? So going back to what Vanessa was alluding to earlier was that it's basically kind of different factors in a general sense that it's human interaction, it's psychology, it's a lot of different factors, you know, essentially for everyone that everyone kind of, um, merges in life, and so this human interaction in its environments is just what we are essentially creating, right? So subjective environment, and just because one person feels something about a certain space, that doesn't mean that it'll feel the same way for for others, right? So it is very interesting and again ever evolving and constantly evolving. So
Yeah, thank you for that. Peter?
I think the thing that sort of feels like this thread that we've sort of been talking about is idea of collectiveness and this idea of collaboration. And there is, like Vanessa was saying, sort of no one part. It's sort of the sum of all of it. And I think it's great. Sometimes it's a little hard being a designer because it's like, can we just make a decision? But I do think this idea of like highly collaborative, highly sort of there's not a lot of hierarchy in sort of good design, that there can be collaboration. I think definitely surprised me from school, where you're sort of maybe in this ecosystem of working alone, being the project designer, the project manager, the lighting designer, all of the things. That role gets really disrupted in the design process when you start working and realizing how much collaboration and coordination and specialties and generalists that there can be in the work world. So.
Peter, was there a moment when you knew you were going to be a designer?
No. I feel like it's a series of those sort of moments. I think it goes back to this idea of like purpose and how do you kind of put purpose forward in space. And I think all of us hopefully feel this like sense of really when we design and we create, we're embodying that purpose. And I think interior designers, so much of what we do is about the experience of space and connection, and like that's very emotional, that's very like evocative. And I think that that's sort of where I get a lot of joy out of, is being able to be just a sort of a note to Vanessa's point in that sort of orchestra of design.
Yeah, Eladette's nodding. Was there a moment when you knew that design was for you, that you were going to be a designer? Or was it just something you always felt? It sounds like Peter said, it was a series of moments for him.
it was a series of moments. Again, like Peter, initially I started going off to college as a musician. I said, I'm a music major. I am, all for, being a flautist, and, that's what I want to do. Right. But then along the trajectory of, that first year, I essentially was thinking about other possibilities, right? So architecture was one of them. I considered that for a second. I'm like, okay, well, great. I'm good at math. I love music, and let's see what else sparks joy in me, right? So essentially, then I came across a couple of ideas, I guess, with the help of a professor, like, okay, what is it that sparks joy in you? I said, design, architecture, music, creativity, right? So there wasn't exactly a moment when I said, this is what I want to be, but I knew I wanted to be creative. I knew I wanted to be just constantly changing, constantly bringing joy, bringing in sparking joy, and helping others have that same spark within spaces. And yeah, essentially.
You
Yeah.
felt it in yourself and you want to share that with others.
Exactly.
Yeah. Paul, your path to this industry you talked about earlier, and you're on the product manufacturer side. How did was there a concrete moment when you felt that this was the right industry for you?
I would echo what Elida and Peter were saying. I don't know if there was one specific moment where I was like, yes, I'm doing the right thing here. It's just kind of a building up of moments, I would say. You get a little thank you here, or you get to see the finality of a project here that you worked really hard on. Something, I mean, I told you about my math background.
Yeah.
You have really instant gratification with math. You find the answer and it's either right or it's wrong. The project could take years, and then you finally get to see ultimately that final piece of work. I think that's pretty awesome. So I would say ultimately a number of moments, but that seeing that project, that first big project in finality is pretty awesome.
Yeah. And Vanessa, I don't want to leave you out.
I would just want to echoing a little bit what everyone was saying earlier about early design inspiration and sparks. Elliot was saying that her spark may help inspire someone. I'm not sure about my spark inspired someone. As my early age, I did have this notion of changing room per season. Out asking my dad, my mom to help rearrange my room per season, to change my bed in different places. Then it did not realize to me as I want to become interior designer. But one day my parents did came to me and say, why don't you just become interior designers? Why don't you just change your living space? Why don't you affect others to help building that environments you wanted to?
Yeah.
So that's just when it come to my realization. Maybe this can be a career path for me.
That's really great. I'm glad to hear that your parents encouraged you in that direction. We often hear the opposite side of that for a lot of designers who don't have that level of encouragement for their parents. So it makes me feel really good for you that your parents encouraged you. Hey, Peter, I've got a question, a work question for you, right? There are a lot of really smart people running really great firms, right? We know that. But what is it that those smart people don't necessarily know about emerging designers and millennial designers? What do you wish they knew about the world of work for your generation? I'm asking for a friend.
It's such a big question, and I want to honor and respond to it, and hopefully sort of not try to generalize too much, which is something we can often can be done with our sort of young millennials and Gen Z. But I think for me, and what I feel like is just this continuation of a thread that comes through is it's about people. It's our leaders, our teams, our projects need to really center that humanness. And I think so often people are coming to work and they need to see their leaders be authentic. They need to see them be genuine and vulnerable, and like ask them how their day was and actually mean it, and not sort of do it in a performative, yeah, as a toss off. So I think that there's a real sense of connection that's needed now more than ever, because I think so many of us went through so much turmoil and change with COVID and what's happened in 2020 with George Floyd and things, that I think it's just the idea of work and life, like we were talking about earlier, being these like binaries that are separated by a very hard line, I think is just totally disrupted. So I think it's about people and really centering like transparency in the process of what you're going to do at work, who you're going to work with, transparency in what you're going to get paid, and talking about those things. I think we're sort of a generation that's disrupting a lot of those norms, and not sort of associating our value with like just what we make, but more of like what we can bring to the world and like what purpose can be pushed forward. I think to Paul's point about urgency, I feel like there is this sense of we don't have time. We don't have time to like sit around and like wait for others to solve the climate crisis, to solve, diversity, equity, inclusion in the industry. We don't have time to solve, integrating AI and disrupting sort of the way we do stuff. So I think there's a real urgency, which I'm excited about, because I think that sort of pushes things forward for us to be more innovative. And I think just to go back to it, I think it's about belonging. There's a Brene Brown quote that I really love. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. And I think designers are looking not to fit in, they're looking to belong. And that really goes back to people. So that was a lot there, but I think it's
That was
just
a
really
lot.
about people.
And you know what? I'm going to ask you about one more thing. What about feedback? In a situation, so, and not necessarily performance review, but how do you feel? And you can speak for yourself, or you can be the spokesperson for an entire generation, but like that has changed over the years about feedback, and how is that happening, or how do you feel that could be happening maybe better?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think what the feedback question gets to is this idea of safety in the workplace.
Yeah.
And you sort of don't know what you don't know unless you're told it. And I think being really overt in that sort of like, I want to give you some feedback, balancing it with more sort of praise and recognition than critical feedback. We know that as humans, like if we're repetitively told like you're not doing it right, that's sort of going to beat you down. But if you can give that feedback often, within the safe space of like private feedback. The idea is like, give feedback privately and then praise in maybe bigger spaces.
Yep.
But I think it just has to happen often. It has to happen throughout different levels of your organization. And it needs to be sort of a cultural, ingrained in your culture. Like at this organization, we give feedback, and we give feedback often because we know that sort of puts forward the best ideas. Because I think a lot of us, we start out, we're like, well, I guess I'm doing okay until someone tells me I'm not.
Somebody tells me otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great comment on culture, that it needs to be ingrained in the culture. But also when you're looking at interviewing with another firm, understanding what that feedback culture is at that firm, because if you're a person who requires a lot of feedback, and that is not part of the culture of the firm, like, those are those discrete things that you should be thinking about and asking about as well. So thank you for those. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the feedback thing also goes to sort of the trust and the mentorship that, there's this pipeline of people that want to grow and build, but it's sort of like, I trust you enough to sort of give you that feedback to build your skill set. And so I think it also goes back to the authenticity piece. And I think hopefully just we're normalizing building feedback in a little bit more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Hey, Eladad, so Peter kind of talked about, different factors within the workplace, but I'd love for you to check in on what do you think are some of the largest challenges, the biggest challenges that are facing emerging to mid-career designers? And with those challenges, I always love to balance. And so if there are a couple of challenges you want to list, what are some opportunities that exist for designers at the phase of the career that you're in?
For sure. Super great question. I do think that sometimes we face challenges within ourselves, right? We have this kind of, what do you call it, imposter syndrome, and we don't believe, and we don't credit ourselves for that, and a lot of times we fail to recognize ourselves, right? So I would say, to help with that, it's great to build a list for yourself, and say, you know what, I've achieved this, I've done this, I've done this I've achieved this in a speedy way, or whatever it is, that is different from the general type or whatnot, right? But create a list for yourself and say, I've accomplished these. These are my accomplishments, and this is what I can offer, and this is me, right? And give credit to yourself, right? A lot of the times we lack that confidence in ourselves, and we say, am I okay? Am I good? So definitely pump yourself up, give yourself more credit than you actually do every day. So and always keep learning, right? So that's always a plus. And again, because we have an evolving, career, an evolving industry, learning is a big one, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to mentors again, that's a great opportunity. Always keep in touch with your mentors in the past and, you know, your new ones, right? Because, you know, from firm to firm or from industry to industry, you have these mentors, and, you know, keep in touch with them. Stay, you know, message them every so often, and, you know, even if it's not about work, you know, I'm very good friends with a few of my past mentors, and always keeping in touch with them is great. You know, it's always a great thing to do, because not only are they also changing, you know, in their careers, but you are too, and you are changing ever so often, right? So, yeah.
That was great. I love the list. That's a great way of keeping yourself accountable to yourself, but then also documenting the positives as well as things you need to work on. I love that. And then also recognizing that mentorship isn't static, that your mentors are growing just as you are growing, and acknowledging that and keeping them as part of your network. I super appreciated those answers. Thank you. Hey, real quick, there are always things that we worry about in life and in work. Peter, I'm going to start this question with you, but if anybody else wants to jump in, when you're thinking about kind of the state of the industry, the state of the world, what keeps you awake at night and why?
A lot of things. I'm an overworrier. I'm an anxious person.
You are an overthinker.
I am. No, I think it's sort of two things. I think it goes back to what a lot of us have talked about, of just purpose. And I think, you know, the climate, I don't like to use sort of like kind of alarming words, but like the climate crisis, like the climate has changed. And so to sort of think about, especially the work we do and as interior designers, I think our voice in sort of this hasn't always been the most forward that it could be. And I think this generation and myself, it's like we know that the impacts of the built environment are huge and vast and global and systematic. And so like to address the climate crisis, interior designers sort of need to be at that table and need to be willing to challenge our clients and challenge our partners to address sustainability through all sort of levels. And then I think the second part just sort of goes, I'm like a organizational culture people nerd, but I think it goes back to like work and why we work. And, you know, we're coming off of the Great Resignation. Now there's people saying this is the great disengagement, or great sort of like people are not feeling engaged at work. And I think that is just really from, you know, leadership and a lot of factors, but it keeps me up at night that for a lot of people, their work really depletes them and it doesn't nourish them. And I just sort of hope that we can kind of figure out how to better engage with people, how to give them recognition, how to build them up, how to mentor them, and for work to sort of be a nourishing and not a depleting thing. So those are big things to try to think about.
Anybody else like Peter staying up? What's keeping you awake at night? Anybody else want to share? Vanessa, who doesn't go to sleep.
I did. There's a lot of things keeps me up at night for sure. A lot of it are, am I making the right decisions? Who's the decision I need to make sure it's the correct cause? Do I have enough time? So one side of voice, we're echoing to what Paul was saying earlier, is that there's a generation demanding, I want it today. I want it now. But also there's a sign that my work say, I want it yesterday. And it's often than not, I don't hear anybody say, we have time.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So it's about managing the expectation. So every day before I go to sleep, I try to manage that expectations, making a list in my head, who am I going to talk to first tomorrow, to organize this list of actionable items in source, and say, if I have talked to this person first, and then I talk to the other person later, would that help the flows work better? Or the constant of marking my calendars, saying, is it meeting necessary? Can I give that back that time so they can work and focus on producing what need to be next? So that is really going back to management of my own time and expectations, so I respect others as well.
And Vanessa, that intentionality that you speak to, You know, there is effort. Like none of this happens by accident, and so that intentionality you talk about in the efforts of managing your time and your own expectations. You're giving our audience, all of you, some very valuable insight, and it's really appreciated. Paul, anything keeping you up at night?
You know, Cheryl, lots of things, but technology is something that
Ooh.
that kind of scares me a little bit. I am a very, very face-to-face interactive kind of person. And I actually have read some stuff recently about Gen Z that makes me encouraged about their level of face-to-face interaction, or that they do want that. But ultimately, I think through COVID, we became ultra comfortable with email. We became ultra comfortable with Microsoft Teams, maybe not even putting your camera on. We became ultra comfortable for that. And ultimately, what keeps me up at night is keeping that office a place to collaborate and to interact face to face, because when that goes away, you are missing very, very important details. And like I said earlier, this is a very detail-oriented industry, and one detail goes wrong and the whole thing can go wrong.
Yeah.
So the lack of true face-to-face communication and technologies, I guess, part to play in that is scary. And I just hope that we find the best way to use it for good, and for instead of avoiding having personal interaction.
You segued very nicely in kind of the next area that I wanted to touch on. I'm going to pivot to Vanessa, Paul, and then back to you. Obviously, you know, with your generation, certainly technology, you know, you grew up with it. It is very much a part of your lives. It is very much a part of our lives as an industry. It's reshaped how your clients interact with the world and with one another. Vanessa, let me start with you. What's your philosophy on the intersection of technology and design? And within the realm of technology, you know, that's a competency that designers can't afford to ignore, right?
You're right. Time is too precious. For me, this philosophy is really the technical and the design, technology and design must evolve together. Well, I heard somebody recently say AI isn't going to replace us, but those who use AI will replace who's not. And this is true. It's motivated me to stay ahead of the curve, try every single AI tool that I can help, not just for myself to understand it, but also for the team who working together too. So reflect back to on my early career with I would say CAT. When CAT was transitioning to Revit, it was transformative. It's connecting architecture, design, engineering unified on one platform. And now with the help of AI, there's a whole design universe like open to each other. You can get very much what you can get done in a week now can be get done in a day. And that changed the expectation of our client as well.
Yeah.
As I'm in hospitality today, where renovation opening can cost $1 million in revenue, a day of delay. The speed is really crucial, and this technology need to be developed in this parallel path. Let's say a week ago when we have expectation of design of a schematic design, right? We're not just talking about floor planning, but we're also talking about 3D massing. And with the expectation nowadays that you can just click a button, we can render 10 renderings at the same time. It changed our client perspective as well, our design team perspective as well. So I would say advanced technology isn't an option. It's essential to staying competitive.
Essential. Thank you. Yep, that's fantastic response. Paul, this intersection of design and technology from the product manufacturer side, do you want to address that for me?
Yeah, so it's ultra important, Cheryl. We obviously with a huge team of designers on the manufacturer side and a large dealer network, it is very imperative that that time factor Vanessa was just mentioning does not lag. Ultimately, because it is a fast-moving industry, and we need to use pieces of technology that are going to make things happen faster. Ultimately, the AI portion is very interesting to me. Vanessa mentioned it, but Han is really pushing AI on us to utilize it as soon as possible. Make yourself familiar with the tools, because ultimately things are going to just continue to move faster and faster and faster. And ultimately, it comes down to saving people time and money. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And it's our jobs to figure out ways to do that ultimately.
Yeah. Perfect. Let me, I'm going to be conscious of time and I want to get to some audience questions. So I've just got a couple more questions and then I'm going to blend in some questions from our audience. But let me jump to Elodette real quickly. If you could go back in time, we've been talking about kind of now and next, and we'll talk about the future in a couple seconds. But if you could go back in time, Elodette, and give your younger self some advice, what would that advice be?
It's very tough, I guess, because there's a lot of things that I would tell myself, but um, um,
To join
would,
IIDA, that would be some good advice
yes,
for your
join
younger self.
IIDA.
Shameless plug, but I couldn't help myself.
Like we talk about wellness a lot, right? So, and not to, take a down, step here, but taking care of oneself first, just because our wellness goes well hand in hand with the performance, right? So always noting what are your stressors, because then you can address them, right? There's many of us that come through our career path and we're like, second guessing ourselves, right? And then we think, am I okay? Like I mentioned before, am I doing well? And so really balancing your life. Like I see some of the comments in the chat saying like, I have trouble balancing life. I myself, I'm a mother. Allow yourself to take that opportunity and allow yourself to socialize, outside of work. Definitely. 30 backs of 30, sorry, was it future or forward?
Your younger self.
A younger self, sorry, or backward. I said it opposite.
That's all right.
So I would definitely give myself some more time to relax, I guess. But in that same aspect, push harder in that sense of getting into learning one thing very good, getting very good at it, and then, being, what? This is a specialty for me, and perhaps I'm very good at this. It could be, I don't know, rendering. It could be 3D modeling, and Revit, and become very familiar with families or something. But I would really say, feel good about one thing, really master it. Have that goal in the back of your head. So beginning, I like this phrase a lot. It comes from a book, and it was also mentioned in another panel discussion, beginning with the end in mind. So having that goal in your head, but creating a path and building yourself to that goal. So what's step one? So essentially building backwards, and allowing yourself to go through that path. And, things are going to get you, there's going to be certain steps that you have to do to get that, but you'll get there. And if you have your mind to it, you'll get there. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so you took us back to your younger self. Let me ask Peter to jump ahead. 30 years, let's just say 30 years. What do you expect to see, or what do you want to see in our industry? How do you envision the design industry? So I'm asking you to be a bit of a futurist right now, but let's look ahead 30 years.
Yeah, I might sound like a broken record, but I think it's going to be more human. It's going to be more real. Space is going to hopefully reflect more of the people and the generation. I mean, it's changing, things are changing, and I think our industry, for as much as I love it, can be sometimes regressive around sort of the pace of change. So I hope it sort of meets the moment, because there's a lot of young people who are like, I could get a cushy tech job and make 4 times as much money and maybe have a better balance. So I think to sort of embody the humanness, it needs to be more iterative. It needs to be more connected. Space needs to be, and purpose needs to be like non-negotiable.
Huh? Oh,
I don't know if
nice.
I'm getting a little meta there, but
No, that's awesome.
that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah. I've got a lot of questions have come from the audience, and definitely a lot of questions around balance. And any one of you who want to jump in, I think that is a question as old as time. But we always like to hear folks give some hints, tips, perspective on how you achieve balance. And I won't even say between life and work, but how do you achieve balance in your lives right now, right? Because that's something that shifts and changes over time for sure. Anybody want to address that one?
Cheryl, I try to stay in
Go
the
for it,
middle.
Paul.
I
Yeah,
try to
ooh,
stay in the
stay
middle,
in the
if
middle.
that makes any sense.
Okay. Okay, math guy, you stay in the middle.
I
Median.
just think nothing is ever as big as it seems, and nothing is ever as little as it seems either. So I think we kind of go through life kind of with a lot of up and down, a lot of spikes, if you may. And I think just kind of taking the bad things and saying that's not as bad as it really is, but also taking the good things and appreciating them, but not allowing yourself to get too high, so then you have to come back down when that good goes away. I think just kind of staying in the middle, but allowing yourself to feel the emotions of the good and the emotions of the bad, but ultimately coming back to that middle is ultimately what's been effective for me. And I'm somebody who's dealt with anger issues in the past, and this is something that's ultimately really helped me with kind of just work-life balance and not letting work stress me out too much or let personal life fall into work life. It's really kind of worked for me, so
Yeah.
wanted to share it.
Thank you for that honesty. Anybody else want to share some wisdom around balance?
I think for me personally, the key to balance is really in being process oriented.
Mm,
So that means just understanding a problem before we trying to jump right into solution. Because if you're trying to find solution right at hand, it will stress you out. But if you break it down by steps, look at the process, then maybe you can say, I would focus more on the task first, and then second, prioritize the tasks that I don't need to complete right now. So in that sense, it can give you some balance back of your day. I don't mean that we all have a 9 to 5 job.
no.
I do say that we understand there are industry challenge of time and expectation. So when we do have deadlines, we know that we need to focus to get this done first, but not knowing the steps or the orientation need to be complete, that would throw me into a frenzy.
Yeah.
And I think that is a balance, right?
Yeah.
The work-life balance, it's the same thing too. As if I say, okay, at work today, I have an event at 5:30, 2 days. How many events a week should I go to just to make sure forcing myself being socialized? I know I have deadline. So maybe I just trying to advance, trying to get at least 1 or 2 socialized event calendar IIDA, put it on my list, or other life circumstance too. Not
Yeah.
just for myself, but forcing other socialize into my factor. Like my baby, he need to hang out with his friends. I need to hang out with those moms. So I don't just talk about design all the time. I can talk to other people about how's their lives going, what is interesting about their job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's such a great perspective, Vanessa, and understanding, right? You can't do everything, right? Life is short, but it's wide. But you have to pick those, you have to pick those priorities and those moments, and then keeping that broad, open mind, because design encompasses so much. It just makes you a stronger designer to incorporate all of those things into your life and different types of people and different types of friends and circumstances. So I really appreciate your saying that. I got a question from a student who, this particular student had little, because of COVID, had very few internships, and the internships that they did have were digital internships, which is a very different way to experience work. And so the question from the student is, do you have any advice on making connections within the industry and then maintaining those connections? IIDA, you addressed a little bit about this when you were talking about mentors, and we certainly are at that moment in time where there certainly are a lot of students who didn't have the opportunity for those face-to-face internships. Many of them are now kind of finding themselves in the work world without having that previous experience of building their own network. Yes, Amy, joining IIDA for the connections. I 100% agree. Thank you for that comment. Belonging to organizations, but what else can help someone who is new to the work world and building their network and building their connections? Any other advice?
Yeah, so I actually, when I was in college, part of a scholarship I had, they really wanted us to have an internship every summer, right? And this was, of course, like it's hard work, right? To find a couple of internships, and you have a certain time to do it and whatnot, right? So I reached out to a nonprofit organization at that time. I had no connections. And I just went to their website. I sent an email. I said they weren't announcing no internships. They weren't announcing anything, right? No hiring, anything. But I reached out, you know, and I said, hey, I would like to intern for you. I At that time, my scholarship was paying me, so I made it known that they were paying me for that internship, so they didn't have to pay me. So that was a good thing because that allowed them to, take that dollar sign off their head and say, you know what, welcome. If you want to
Yeah.
come by, let's talk.
That's
It's always scary to think that you're
sure.
gonna be the person, that reaching out, and it's scary to think that they're gonna say no, but that's the worst that can happen, right?
Yeah, that's
So
super proactive move on your part. And the same thing about informational interviews.
exactly.
Whether it's a firm or a dealership or a manufacturer, taking that pressure off of you're coming in there to interview for a job. It's like, hey, I'm coming in to just talk to you about your firm and your culture. And some people have found themselves getting jobs out of informational interviews. But if you take some of those higher stakes off the table, certainly that that makes that path a little easier. Hey, a question popped up from the audience that I really like, and it was prefaced, I think it was Suzanne Hanlon that asked the question, that all designers are very unique. And Suzanne wants you, though, to address, what do you think, each of you being very different, what's your superpower? I can come up with some good ones for all of you, but we want to hear what's your superpower right now, because it could be very different in time. But right now, what's your superpower?
Well, I would
Vanessa?
say not super powerful for me. I'm not sure. But I would say I would try everything.
Oh, okay. So willingness to try everything, that's your superpower? I love it.
I guess so because this one when I first started my career, someone told me life different when after you turn 30. So before you 30, try everything that you can because people won't judge you the same if you make the same mistake after you 30. And that kind of start foot forward to me and say, okay, maybe I should really, really trying different things, but I don't want to stray too much forward, spring it around my career. So I
Yeah.
keep everything design related. And maybe after at my 30, I can focus on this one thing that I would do best. And this is when I can choose my goal, more practicals.
Love it. Love it. Paul, what's your superpower?
I don't know if it's much of a superpower, but the first thing that came to mind is sometimes I feel like a superhero managing conflict and managing expectations, kind of going back to what Vanessa said about managing expectations. I feel like I'm pretty good at that.
Dude, that is totally a superpower. We may have to do a whole other session on managing conflict and difficult conversations. That's awesome.
I'm in.
Yeah. Eladette, what's your superpower?
I want to say it's managing my partner's, mine, and my daughter's calendar.
Ooh, love it. Yeah, that's pure magic right there. That's great. Peter.
It's people. I'm in this because I love people and I get so much joy out of connecting, facilitating, drawing together. So I'm a people person. That's my superpower.
Nice. Yeah, that is something, right? I think that is the superpower of all designers, right? Designers know people like nothing else. You know the good, the bad, the in between, what motivates people. You help people realize their dreams around place and experience, and that is indeed a superpower. Really quickly, this is going to be a lightning round, my friends. So I'm going to ask you very quickly as we go to wrap, what are you optimistic and excited about right now? Okay, this is a lightning round, so it's going to be really quick, and we have a few minutes left. Who wants to start, or I'm going to call on you?
I'll start, Cheryl.
Go for it, Paul.
So I hope I don't get too much flack for this answer, but I'm excited about designers. To be honest with you, I think this industry, or the office furniture industry specifically, manufacturer side specifically, sometimes leaves designers as the forgotten people. I think that time is over. I think we are more interested in designers. I think we have more respect for designers. I think that's where things should be. So I'm very, very excited for designers. We talked about leading this industry to the next 30 years. I think designers are the way.
Right.
I think
Cool.
I'm just very excited about design and designers, and everything to do with that moving forward. So
Paul, that's a t-shirt. Designers are the way.
there you go.
An IIDA t-shirt. Vanessa, what are you optimistic about?
I am optimistic about the technology stage that we
Okay.
currently at. It's amazing to see how all program software come together. Like if you have a pen and you market it, it's AI powered pens. Then immediately you spark the conversation. We start talking about it. How is it going to change our world? Yes, everything AI powers. As where we are stand as designer, as just human being. How fast can we catch up?
Wow, love it. Eladette, what are you optimistic about?
Also about the technology. Getting that rolled in a little bit more into our world of designers for sure. Getting familiar and learning all these tools that are now emerging, right? So yeah, just familiarizing myself a bit more, and I'm sure everyone else too wants to get to know a bit all these tools that are, arising now. So excited
Perfect.
for that.
Nice. And Peter, bring us home. What are you optimistic about?
I think it's a thread with all of it, which is impact. I think that there's people, there's place, there's technology, and I just think our industry and this sort of next gen is just it's impact 100% of the way. So I'm really optimistic about that profound impact.
That is phenomenal. And I am optimistic about the four of you, what your generation represents for this profession, for this organization as IIDA. I thank you for your time and your candor and your creativity, and your honesty. This was a wide-ranging conversation. I hope the audience enjoyed it as much as I did.